The take-home message this evening is, number one, dementia is not, I repeat, is not normal aging. Okay? Dementia is a progressive, fatal medical disease, and aging is a privilege. Okay? There are no medical cures yet, but the combat to find a cure is progressing and in very impressive ways, as we'll see. Compensation strategies can improve quality of life very, very dramatically. And early detection and early intervention is where we're going. And there's a new kid on the block when we're dealing with dementia is MCI. And you'll hear and read a lot about this in newspapers in the coming years. MCI refers to mild cognitive impairments. And the bottom line with that is that we're beginning in our research, clinical research, to see people now 6 years before you see the full-blown symptoms of dementia. And that's where things are going. Now, a few definitions. Dementia, there are two criteria that defines dementia. The first one is that we're talking about progressive neurological diseases affecting cognitive abilities. These are diseases of the mind. They rob you of your thinking and of your memory. The second criteria is that patients become dependent on others in their activities of daily living. So when we talk about, so these are pretty general, this is quite general. So the question now is, what type of dementia are we talking about? Well, the ones we'll be stressing tonight is Alzheimer's, because it represents 50% of all the dementias. We'll be talking about vascular dementia. That represents 30% of all the dementias. And the rest of the 20% are a whole list of other diseases like Huntington's disease, Wilson's disease, frontal temporal dementias, Lewy body disease, and many more. So, but we'll focus on the 80% of all dementias. Now, another definition: cognition, cognitive disorders. It's the ability of the brain. Cognition is the ability of the brain. So, underline the word brain here, to register, to store, and retrieve information in order to solve problems in every day. Okay? Now. So cognitive functions like memory, perception, language are not disconnected from our brain. Okay? So you need it to register, to pay attention, to store and process information, and also to retrieve. Different diseases affect the brain in different areas, and those different brain areas will affect cognition, cognitive functions in very different ways. Therefore, the intervention, the cure, the treatment will all vary according to where the disease is in the brain. In terms of statistics, all Canadians 65 to 74, 2% of Canadians have Alzheimer's. So here you have it, okay? Here's an example. A lot of people think that if you live old enough, you'll get dementia. This is wrong. This is not true. Forget about that. So that means 98% of all Canadians 65 to 74 do not have any progressive neurological disease affecting their mind. Okay? Many are sharp as whistles. Now, when you get to 75 to 84, 11%. So those statistics really jump out. All Canadians 85 and over. If you make it to 85, almost 4 out of 10 people, 35% of all of us in this room, if we make it to 85, will die from dementia. So, you know, this is very, very serious. Now, if you pull all these together and you look at all the Canadians, we're talking about 8% of Canadians and industrialized countries suffer from dementias. Dementias are diseases of the mind. What is the mind? Okay, I mean, that's a $1,000 question, $1 million question. Where is the mind? What is the mind? To try to look into the brain to find the mind is a bit like opening up a radio and looking for the music, right? Where's the music? Maybe it's in this frontal part right over here, or maybe it's in this rectal part. These are medical terms, rectal part and the back. Means below. Or in the mind, okay? Or consciousness. Sometimes when you read all these fancy, the literature out there, newspapers, looks like consciousness is over here, humor is in this frontal part here. Language, of course, is in temporal regions of the brain, of the cortex here. Perception is over here. I mean, if motor skills like piano playing and is in the cerebellum down here, I mean, it can't be that simple, right? So, what is the mind? Well, the mind people say, scientists say, people say, the mind is what the brain does. Now the question is, what does the brain do, right? Well, over millions of years of evolution, the hundreds of millions of years that brains have evolved from smaller animals to humans, the brain has developed very, very complex behaviors in order to interact and to adapt to its environment. Okay. Did you know that only living organisms that move in space, that explore their environment, have brains? Any living organism that doesn't move in space, okay, except my father-in-law, that doesn't move in space, okay, has a brain, okay? So we'll be looking at those three angles to understand the mind. You have to look at the three angles of brain, behavior, and environment to understand the complexities of the aging mind and of dementia. So this is what a real brain looks like, except, of course, for the astronaut. And also, the arteries have been taken out. Okay, so the arteries have been taken out. This is a real brain. And the single most complex object in the known universe is the human brain. If the brain was not as complex as it is, we could not understand it, study it. So there are human brains that study human brains. If the brain was not complicated, we couldn't do that. Let alone understanding the universe and the world around us. This is an extraordinarily complicated machine. Now, there are different geographical zones in the brain, temporal lobes, the frontal lobes here, frontal cortex, temporal cortex, a parietal cortex, occipital cortex, and what the word cortex in Greek means a bark of a tree. Another word that we use is that this cortex, which is the thickness of an orange peel, very thin. And it has in that layer, okay, that covers the brain, 100 billion neurons. That's a lot of neurons, okay? 100 billion neurons. And this cortex, we refer to that as association areas of the brain. So all the higher mental functions take place in those association areas of the brain. And guess what breaks down in dementia? Those association areas of the brain. So I want to teach you now, explain to you the connection about cognitive disorders and brain disease, how brain behavior are linked, okay? Well, if you had damage in this association area here because you had multiple strokes, vascular dementia, or Alzheimer's, right? You had damage over here. You would have a cognitive disorder of what we call alexia, inability to read. You would have a severe reading problem. Now, so I'll do this test with you. I'll show you this next slide, okay? And I'm going to show you as if you didn't have brain damage, which I don't think you do, okay? So what you see there are just symbols. And automatically what you do is you make associations of the fact that this could be green, it could be red, it could be yellow. It's a fruit as opposed to a vegetable. It's hard, it grows in trees. Some are called Granny Smith. Others are called Macintosh. They fall in the autumn. You could make apple pie. All these connections, associations are made automatically. If you had damage in that area, like in Alzheimer's disease, you would look at that and it would make absolutely no sense. You couldn't make those connections. And that's what cognitive disorders are. When you have damage there, you can't make those associations. This is what explains cognitive disorders. Now, I'm going to show you another set of symbols, just to show you how complicated and wonderful all this is and how we're learning so much. Another set of symbols. Same thing, okay, but a little different, okay? Oh, en français. You guess Guy Proulx, c'est français, là. If language was in the brain, you know, we'd all be French in Canada. So basically, what's fascinating is that every single human in the world, in our world, okay, in our world, all the countries and all those languages, we all have one thing in common. We don't use more than 30 basic sounds, 35, 36 on the average sounds, every human being in the world. So those sounds, we arbitrarily combine them to associate them to objects in our world, in our universe. So, you know, sometimes you say, I could remember the face, but I can't remember that name. Words, names and words, it's kind of normal to forget my name tomorrow morning. It's arbitrary. Guy is arbitrary. Another reason why we're learning so much and we're advancing so much in our knowledge in the field of cognitive disorders is new technology. What this is showing you here is what we call an fMRI, which shows you fine details of the brain, superimposed with PET scans, okay? Now, when I showed you those symbols, right, what you did automatically is that in the brain, at 100 milliseconds, so it takes 100 milliseconds to get over here. You take 1 second and cut into 1,000 slices. Those machines could do that, from 1 millisecond to 300 milliseconds. 100 milliseconds in the visual association areas of the brain, at the occipital region here. 100 milliseconds later in the frontal region with all this information about the apple was all pulled together. And another 100 milliseconds in the motor cortex to say the word apple. Every word that comes out of my mouth takes 300 milliseconds, about a quarter of a second to come out. And we are all calibrated to interact at that level. So we think it's pretty automatic and pretty immediate. But let me tell you, in the brain, new technology, 300 milliseconds is a hell of a long time, okay? So now we have the technology to see all these minute details, and we have a better understanding of the brain and the diseased brain, and that is explaining a lot of the big progress that we're doing in the field. So the brain is an information processing machine, okay? A very complex machine. And with the discovery of DNA and the double helix, okay, there are millions of programs that are hardwired, okay? We don't have to think to breathe. We don't have to think to walk, to cry, to laugh. These are hardwired and have been with us for tens of millions of years, okay? So there's many programs out there. Now, the brain is an information processing beyond the genetic system, extra genetic information processing, where? At the level of the association area, at the level of the cortex. 100 billion of those neurons. Now we have technology to be able to see that. And when we talk about dementia, like Alzheimer's, it's at this level. These are the ones that die out. 100 billion of those with up to 100,000 connections between. One could have, from 10,000 to 100,000 connections with other. That's a lot. You multiply that, that's more stars than there is in our universe, okay? So now what in this information processing machine, it's all that we learn, everything that we learn has to be connected, associated at the level of the cortex. The human machine also does information processing even beyond the cortex, even beyond the body. Let's call it extrasomatic, extra body information processing. So we have all this knowledge. We are meaning-making machines. We create culture, and culture are habits, or what I call cognitive prefabs, that older generations pass on to us so we can save a lot of time. With hopefully from one generation, those useful habits can help us improve the condition of life and help us improve with this extra wisdom, cure terrible diseases like dementia. Now, let's look at a bit how brain and normal aging, okay? A little bit. This was a remarkable study by a colleague of mine, Dr. Cheryl Grady at Baycrest. And what she found, she took a group of young adults, okay, and compared to a group of healthy, okay, older adults in their 70s. What she did is she presented them with very short sentences to remember. And 5 minutes later, she would ask them to recall those short stories. The black cat jumped over the garbage can, for example. And 5 minutes later in the machine, well, both groups, younger, the 18-year-olds and the 70-year-olds, did exactly the same. They did very well. But, so they got the same results, except when you look in the brain, wow, the information was processed very, very differently. So yes, cognitive functions and memory changes with aging. It's prejudice to say that, it deteriorates, right? Things change. It's different. So information is processed very differently as we mature, thank God, okay? I think. And so this is a young brain, and you see how things are very different in the aging brain. So what is it with normal aging that changed? Well, the worst that happens, the major change is really with recent memory, okay? And recent memory is like what you remember like within an hour to a few days, okay? That's how it's measured. And this spontaneous recall, like from my mind, okay, if I learn something that I've learned in the past, and to get that stuff out of there, is really is the worst problem that we notice with that people complain about. And how we test that is we give shopping lists to people, 16 words in this case, and we repeat them 4 times. And 20 minutes later, we ask them, do you remember that list we gave you? Okay, remember that list we gave you? And they have to give it spontaneously, freely from their mind without having any cues around them. So you give those lists, and people can actually chunk them as you move along into spices and herbs and fruits and vegetables and milk products. So they can actually chunk the information. Young people do very, very well. And as you age, okay, 75 and over, you get about half of that list. So that's the worst problem we see with normal aging, free recall from the mind. Now, interesting thing though, we can compensate for that. We can compensate. What we do here is that list that they've learned, those 16 words, and what we do is now we embed those in 60 foils. And lo and behold, when we ask people to recognize, not to recall freely, but to recognize the ones that they've learned from all of these foils, the 75, 80-year-old, do very, very well. So environmental support, when you can recognize what you've learned, they're able to pick that out. So there are problems, but we can compensate for them. The question will be then, can we also compensate in the brain? Does that reflect compensation also in the brain? Now, there are problems, but some of the myths about aging are all being shot down. One of it is, for example, one thing that just sometimes actually no change, improves sometimes with aging, is facts, knowledge, vocabulary. The average age of Canadian judges, American judges, is way up there in the early 70s, late 60s. Why? Because they have more knowledge, more experience, or what some people refer to as more wisdom, okay? Immediate memory. This is surprising, okay? What is immediate memory? Immediate memory is the ability to remember small amounts of information over a few seconds. How do we measure that? We give them lists of numbers increasing, okay? And the average person gives you about 7, the magical 7 plus or minus 2, okay? So we can take about 7 bits of information immediately, plus or minus 7. Okay, what happens with the look at this, very little change. So you can drive your car from Toronto when you're 85 to Montreal. You can sustain immediate memory. So, it really maintains very well. So this to show you, yes, there are things that change. You can compensate for those in normal aging, and some don't. Actually, some do actually improve, okay? And now, more things that are more like comparing with normal and not, what's normal, what's not. Well, forgetting the name of someone you've only seen, you see now and then, forgetting my name tomorrow, that's normal, okay? What's not normal is forgetting the name of a close family. If you can't remember the names of your children and your wife, there's a problem, okay? And that's the way it is, okay? So people have funny ideas about what's not normal. What's normal? Well, forgetting to buy something at the store. That's normal, okay? Forgetting that you've been to the store an hour ago. Now, that's not normal, okay? What's normal? Repeating a comment or a question a few hours later. A lot of us do that, okay? What's not normal is repeating a comment and a question seconds later, okay? So believe me, when there are problems and there's disease, it's much more obvious than people think. Okay, now we're jumping into the disease process. We had to look at a bit of normal aging. Disease process, Alzheimer's disease, okay, which is a big one, 50% at least, if not more. And what happens with Alzheimer's disease, you get this toxic accumulation of a protein. So protein go in there, and there's, they go there when there's damage. There's some need to build body parts, right, from hair to derrieres, right? You need proteins, right? And so, you get those proteins, but for some reason, well, one reason that they know is that there's a chromosome 19, for example, does not produce a cholesterol-breaking agent. So they can't break down the accumulation of this protein. It becomes toxic, and when it does, it kills those neurons out there. And some of the drugs that people are trying to develop now is to break this aggregation or the accumulation of this protein. Other drugs is to reduce. You see the inflammation, how red it is? Well, just like arthritis, you might have a lot of arthritis and you can't move. You get anti-inflammatories, you move much better. You haven't done anything to the disease continues, but functionally you do much, much better. And this is one area where they hope with anti-inflammatories, maybe some drugs where they can reduce this, you get better symptoms, but it does nothing to the progression of the disease, okay? Now, so this is what happens with Alzheimer's here. You go inside the temporal regions, something terribly starts happening. And in this area, remember this name, we'll come back to it, the basal forebrain nuclei, which produces a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, okay, cholinergic neurotransmitter, okay. So and then there. Now this area here goes terribly wrong, and it projects into the hippocampus. What does the hippocampus do? That's the part of the brain that lays down new memories. Anything you learn new, okay, has to go through this machine here, okay, the hippocampus. So there's damage over here, and then, you know, with the cholinergic neurotransmitter projected at those temporal regions, frontal. So all these red dots here are those accumulation of those plaques, of those amyloid plaques that kill the neurons. So basically the frontal areas, temporal, parietal region, but none here at the primary motor, primary sensory areas, primary visual areas. So Alzheimer's disease, typically when you see them, they look very good, okay, in terms of motor. They don't have any physical problems, they used to say. You start talking to them, wow, I mean, they have big problems. Well, that's because they have damage to a very important physical part of the brain, of the human body, which is the human brain. So they don't have damage in the subcortical regions or in the primary motor. They do well until very late in the disease. Parkinson's disease, which often causes dementia, also affects, you know, a basal ganglia area of the brain, and they have damage below. So the first thing you'd see in a patient who has Parkinson's is slowness and motor problems. Not only slowness in the motor functions, but also with memory functions and even cognitive functions, okay? Now, vascular dementias. If you took the brain and you took all the brain tissue and all you were left with would be the vascular tubing, okay, the blood supply to the brain. You know, so you have those big arteries and you have all these tiny blood vesicles and little tiny capillaries. A lot of things could go wrong. People are very naive about that. So vascular dementia is a big one out there, and we'll be hearing a lot more. And then, you know, about that, we know quite a bit, you know, when we talk about multiple infarct dementias, but that's just one part, one aspect of vascular dementia. If you took all the tubing in one body, okay, all the vascular tubing and tied one beside the other, you could wrap it around the earth 2 times. A lot of things could go wrong with this, okay? So we're not paying enough attention to that, and much research is being done in this field, okay? So now we've looked at the brain, normal aging, we looked at dementia a little bit. Let's look at the behavior when somebody has dementia, okay? So big, nice tip for you, a nice tip to understand about dementia, because dementia affects the association areas of the brain, the thinking, cognition, memory. Think of the 4 A's. I'll be teaching about the 4 A's and E, okay? Breakdown in language, aphasia. Breakdown in motor, complex motor, purposeful movement, apraxia. Breakdown in perception, agnosia. Breakdown in memory, amnesia. Breakdown in executive function or planning and complex sequence of behavior and execution of behavior, executive function. So let's look at those, and remember that those complex behaviors are related to damage to the brain. So there's just not behaviors disconnected or disembodied, okay? So the first one is aphasia, breakdown in language. The patient comes to my office and I do this simple test, okay? I have a pen, I have a pencil, and I say, good morning, Mr. Jones. Not a problem, good morning. Touch, I have this test for you. I hate tests. Well, you know, they usually are aware. You ask them, do you think you have a memory? Oh, of course I do. I'm a memory specialist. Okay, I'll do a test. I say, well, touch the pencil with the pen. And Mr. Jones typically would look at me bewildered and confused. I'm a scientist of human behavior. So I write down, Mr. Jones appears bewildered, comma, confused, question mark. So then Mr. Jones doesn't do it. And he looks perplexed. So what I do, Mr. Jones, what, he's 75, white hair? I shout, Mr. Jones, touch the pencil with the pen. Hearing is perfect, you know, but so you know, and then Mr. Jones, because you're insisting, right? He touches the pen and the pencil, tabak wit. I ask him to do a simple test, touch the pencil with the pen. He couldn't do that. Hey, the scientist of human behavior says, he's not only look confused, he is. Okay? The proof. Now, the breakdown in language in this case, you know, when you understand the brain, how it works, in this association areas and temporal regions of the brain, what breaks down is they have, amongst many other little problems, one that they call agrammatic. They have agrammatism. So that means if we do this test again, that means if you look at all the sentence, touch the pencil with the pen, they heard every single word if you measured it into the auditory system. They heard everything. But the only words that they could comprehend or make associations with were the substantive, pen, pencil. The, with, the relation between the words, which is grammar, if you didn't know that, okay? Never thought you need your grammar, right? So the, with, the is what they hear, but they just can't make the associations. So basically, Mr. Jones, all along, when I asked him to do that, what he understood was touch, Mr. Jones, that's fine, no grammar there. Touch, pencil, beep, beep, pen. Mr. Jones, touch, pencil, beep, beep, pen. And because I was insisting with my face, my voice, this is other parts of the brain. The right brain modulates emotions. My voice, well, my lungs modulate that. My hands, well, okay. So he can see, I was insisting, so poor Mr. Jones went ahead and touched pencil, pen, because that's what he understood. Touch, pencil, pen, and there was something missing there. Now, he was confused, says the scientist of human behavior. Right? Right. Now we know better. He's got, this language, aphasia, first day, this aphasia problem. Let's do it again, but now understanding what's going on, okay? Good morning, Mr. Jones, no problem. Take the pen. Mr. Jones takes the pen every time. Mr. Jones, touch the pencil. The patient was confused. He's no longer confused. Why? Because there are more confusions with doctors and more confusions with families and more confusion because of what we don't understand than there are confused patients. We have the confusion. The stress is on us. We have to find the answers before we put the stigma of confusion on other people, okay? So that's the first A. Second A is apraxia. Apraxia is the inability to transduce a verbal command into its motor expression. Sounds simple to you, eh? If I would ask you people a very simple question, raise your right hand, right? Well, that's easy, right? Is it not easy? Raise your right hand. Very good. Okay, so now, we take this for granted. If you had Alzheimer's disease, which quite a few people might here, nobody raised their hand. You had to take sounds, and those sounds had to be given into English, eh? So you had to take those sounds, raise your right hand, take those sounds, make the associations in the auditory and verbal sections of the brain, and then transmute that, push that over to the motor system. It's much more complicated than we think. And that's what breaks down with dementia, Alzheimer's disease. So you tell a patient, for example, here I say to him, smile for me. So this man here had a series of small stroke vascular dementia on the left side of the brain, okay? And so he had some language problem, and then I asked him to smile with words. Smile for me. And this is what he did. You can see he's paralyzed on this side, right? Because the left side controls the right side of the brain. Then I said, no, like this, so through imitation. Well, he does a little bit better, but it's not very good, okay? And then the last slide, what I did is that I showed him something very funny. My comb has been with me for many, many years. It's a geriatric comb. A few teeth missing. I had a lot of hair, guys. So, and I showed him my comb. No, this is amazing. The paralysis is gone. Why? Well, we know why. Why? Because there are two roots in the brain for smile. There's an indirect, okay, smile, the voluntary smile. So when I asked him to smile with words, it had to go to the cortex, okay, auditory cortex, make the association, go down to the muscles of the smile and execute that, but he was damaged, so he couldn't do that. That's damage. Then when I showed him something very funny, it went into the primitive brain, the emotional brain, no damage there, went right to the gut, to the emotional brain, and bingo, the paralysis was gone, okay? Another confused patient, another small miracle because we understand the complexities of this. This is beautiful, I think, eh? So now, agnosia, perceptual problem. Listen, look at this. Steps in the process of recognition still take place despite the inability to experience familiarity and formal recognition. This means that putting a name on somebody's face is just one tiny, tiny part to recognition. So the way we measure that, research measured that, was that they would hook people on another part of the nervous system. So the one we're talking about here is the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. And beyond that, all the nerves going outside is called the peripheral nervous system, and in the guts, okay, and in the organs. That's called the autonomic nervous system. You can measure that with a machine called, they call it, it's galvanic skin response. Some people call it lie detector, it's the wrong word. You get 13 people, they're mostly strangers, 3 of which are the wife and the daughters. And the person with Alzheimer's, with this type of problem, would say hello to all these people, not recognizing the two daughters and the spouse. And that's very difficult on the family. We've been married for 50 years. He doesn't recognize me. It's very hard, okay, on them. Okay. Then you hook him on this machine. Lo and behold, he says hello to everybody, but only the response of the autonomic, only response to the loved one, to the daughters and to the wife. So, you know, before you go and visit somebody who's got a lot of damage and you say, they don't recognize me, be very careful, because recognition is a complex process and many, many aspects stay till the last breath, okay, to the last second. The other A, amnesia, the last A is patients with severe amnesia can still learn complex skills, okay? Ooh, I'm doing good. Okay, my time is fine, eh? I might not. Okay, is that water for me? Okay, good, thank you. Now, so the last amnesia. Patient with severe amnesia. Now, these discoveries I'll be talking to you about now, I got to tell you, U of T, we're hot, we're good. Not me, you know, some of my colleagues I work with, Dr. Toving, Dr. Moskowitz, Dr. Craig. Unbelievable, okay, the gifts that University of Toronto and Baycrest and research are giving to the world, okay, in this field. Now, what they found, okay, is that although you can't remember, that's how bad the memory could be. You can still learn some things, okay? So this is a patient I saw at Baycrest a while back. It was so bad, this guy would walk around with this drawer. And in this drawer, he had looked and says, oh, I had stroke in a part of the brain that helps to lay down new memories, and don't worry about going back to work because it's being taken care of by the social worker and your wife and my wife, okay, so on and so forth. And he would meet with you and he would say, hello, what's your name? Can I go home? Can I go back to work? No, you had damage, you know. Thank you, very nice. He'd walk over here. Hello, what's your name? Why am I here? Not even a minute. He's starting all over again. You do this 300-400 times in a half a day. Those nurses are going like really nervous, and they get nervous. He gets nervous. First thing you know, sometimes you know you have to manage this through medication because it's it was very complex and difficult. I've checked the files, and I saw he had a very English name, and I saw in the files that he went to a French school in Quebec City. My brother had the same age, went to that same school. Eh? So I meet with him. He says, good morning. Who are you? Can I go home? Can I go back to work? No, you have a... Then I said, tu parles français? Il dit, oui. You know, and I'll tell you what he said in French. He says, well, my father was in the army, went to Valcartier, not too far from Quebec, sent me to this French school because he thought that bilingualism would pay one day, right? And he had the type of job that was very useful to be bilingual. So anyway, we're talking French. This says, who are you? Why am I here? Why can't I go back to work? So he had not registered at all, okay? The next day we're doing rounds. And guess what? We're about 5 or 6 doctors. We're doing rounds. And what he says to me in French, who are you? Qui es-tu? Why am I here? Pourquoi je suis ici? Est-ce que je peux aller à la maison? Can I go home? I said to him, why do you talk French to me and not to them? He had no idea. We insisted, because it was the first time I saw that. Why are you talking French to me? He says, are we getting political here? Because he looked stupid. I mean, he was rude. Huh? So he looked confused. I got him into my office, okay? He comes to my office, who are you? Hello? Can I go home? Can I go back? No. It's not easy, okay? Then you say, I have a test for you. He says, this is the type of test, a motor test. You do once, twice, 3 times, you get better and better and better. He does it once, I time him, okay? And he does right in the average. He does very well because there's no motor problem with this guy. I said, would you like to have a coffee? He says, yes. What do you take? Milk and sugar. I go back, take the milk and sugar. I come back, he says, who are you? Why am I here? Can I go back home? Can I go back to work? I said, no. And if I would have said, here's your coffee, he would have just got really upset. I never asked you a coffee. He says, here's a coffee. He takes a coffee. How do you know I take milk and sugar? I go, I didn't lie. So anyway, so I said, you know that test? I couldn't say to him, let's do it again. Well, you know what? He said, who are you? Why am I here? Can I go back? So hey, he had no idea. He does it the second time. He gets better and better. He couldn't remember my face visual memory. He couldn't remember my name, verbal memory. None of that stuff, but you'd have him do a task. So, this is very, very good knowledge. We're getting to understand how all this works in the brain. So basically, when people say it to you now, this is what University of Toronto, a lot of research has discovered. When you say your memory is bad, you ask, which one? There are at least 5 different memory systems, independent and interactive, okay? So we'll go through them quickly. So the episodic memory, okay? Episodic memory is basically the explicit or conscious recollection of incidents that occurred at a particular time and place in one's personal past. Semantic memory is all the knowledge and the facts and the concept that is not linked to any particular time and place. What the hell does that mean? Okay, that means that Ottawa is the capital of Canada, right? That's a fact. I went skating in Ottawa last year, February 14, on the canal with my kids, and we ate beaver tails, right? That is an episode in my life, a very specific time and place that occurred to me personally. Okay, this really goes out. You kind of lose some of this with normal aging and severely, okay, with dementia. But this here remains, okay? Now, procedural memory is acquisition of skills and habits, is another type of memory. It's knowing how rather than knowing that. You know, you don't go to university on how to skate. Eh? You can get a PhD on how to skate in Saudi Arabia, okay, whatever. And you say, I'm going to Canada, I'm immigrating to Canada, I'm going to learn how to skate, I'm going to see videos of Guy Lafleur, I'm going to get a PhD in how to skate, right? But you don't put them on. You come to Montreal, what happens? Huh? You fall on the derrière. You have to do that. You don't go to university how to golf or to ride a bicycle, right? Working memory, okay, that's really the short-term memory. It's concerned with short-term retention operations over seconds. To hold information online for basic cognitive activity. So if you want to do a phone number and hold it in your mind while you're doing it, that's working memory. If I would give you the words to remember, I would give you those words, I don't know, table, tail, tabarnouche. I want you to give them back to me, but in alphabetical order. Now that's working memory. You have to think of that. Tabarnouche, tabarnouche, table. Yeah, tabarnouche, table, tail, okay? So you'd have to really, that's working memory. And then the last one is perceptual representation systems. It was important for the identification of words and objects on the basis of their form and structure. So I show you this, you don't even have to think you know this is a pencil, okay, in your mind. So perception just does it automatically. Or if you read the word CAT when you're reading a novel, you don't have to think CAT is a cat. You can see it automatically. So the perceptual systems of the brain is another memory systems. The point I want to make to you very strongly is that there is no disease out there that affects all of those memory systems. So if you can identify which ones are damaged, you can work around it and do compensations. Okay, so to put it all together for you here with this wonderful new research, new science, you're driving down the 401, okay? The 401, you're driving down the 404, right? You know, that's the one that goes in the lake, right? So you're driving down the 404, and you're flooded by all kinds of sensory information in this little buffer, sensory buffer, okay? And all the different sensory systems buffer, which is there just for a couple of milliseconds, a quarter of a second. And it just goes through there, flushes through like Niagara Falls. If you decide to pay attention to something, I can see an apple tree there. And this apple tree there reminds me of a specific episode with my grandmother in the kitchen and we were cooking an apple pie. And this episodic memory and the words I'm using is all brought into this. Okay, and I'm registering because I'm paying attention, right? In this working memory, and I'm retrieving it and telling my passenger about this. Then, then the information comes in here. Or if I decide to keep some information, something new, a new name tonight, I'm going to encode it, consolidate into long-term memory. And then, with normal aging, the big breakdown is really with retrieval, okay? Now, with dementia, when it affects the brain, and as you proceed, the 4 A's, the semantic memory, episodic memory, all of these are affected, except, others that are not affected, like procedural memory. Now, another point I want to make to you with all these different memory systems, remember the connections between brain and complex behaviors, they're tied together. So all these different memory systems, okay? Semantic episodic memory is very much related to the hippocampal region, which consolidates new memories. implicit or subconscious. Okay, these are more like when you're aware, you have to be aware, conscious memories. Explicit, implicit, meaning subconscious, if you wish. Like, you know, you don't have to explain how you've learned how to ride a bicycle. You just do it. You've been conditioned to eat every meal at 12 at noon. This is really processed by the old brain. We call it the cerebellum, and other regions called the basal ganglia. Short-term memory is very much related with a machine, a powerful machine called the thalamus, connected with the frontal systems. So all this different. What's amazing now is that we're now connecting those complex behaviors that we thought were just pure psychological before, and see how they're connected with the inside brain. Okay, and this picture here is if you had an amnestic patient in an environment like this. This is an environment where I work. You would never know he had a problem. You know why? If he's in this environment, what is there to be remembered? There are trees there, doesn't move. All the information, the coffee shop is there, you can smell the coffee, everything is there. So when you compensate the environment, this person, when he's not in any particular context in a room, he's totally out of it. But when he's in a very rich environment, you'd never know, except if you left and came back, he never saw you. You'd look familiar, but he would never remember. But, you know, so I'm telling you, once we understand how all this works, we can perform some great adjustment procedures, compensations. So you are going to see the Lion King, okay? You don't have memory problems. What happens, you know, you can't remember everything. We prune a lot in the brain, a lot of pruning, okay? Not pruning in the brain. So, because to be efficient, you don't want to remember everything. You want to get rid of a lot of stuff. So memory problems is one thing, but forgetting, knowing how to forget is also very important. That's another lecture, okay? So you no problem, beautiful. Okay, now the next week, okay, what you remember, because apparently the ticket is worth just seeing this African woman sing. Apparently she's something else. So this is very salient, very striking. 1 week later, you know what you do is you remember the salient, but all the other details are being washed out. 3 months later, what happens? All the details are washed out, but you really remember this salient feature. It's kind of the way it works in the brain. You have Alzheimer's. I'll show you what happens, okay? Pas de problème in the here and now, okay? In early, moderate Alzheimer's, pas de problème. But then they walk out of the theater, okay? Not even 15 minutes. Whoops, washed out. Not 3 months later, the next morning, it's all washed out, okay? So it's like a Teflon in some ways. So just to give you an idea of normal, abnormal aging, okay? So I'm almost finished. So now the last one, E, okay? Executive functions, the ability to plan and execute complex motor programs, or we call those behaviors, okay? Frontal system is what distinguishes us from, you know, other primates and animals. So basically what happens with patients with frontal lobe damage, and believe me, there's a lot of that stuff, frontal lobe. We have a lot, okay? Nice pair in front, you know? So what you would do, those patients would be, they tend to focus on a small little detail when you have damage there, and you can't pull back and look at the total context. You ask them, what letter do you see here? They tell you N. He says, do you see another letter? He says, yes, N. That's it? Well, there's another N here. There's a lot of N's. So they can't pull back. They get stuck on a small detail. Okay, they get very pulled to a salient feature. This is an Alzheimer patient we saw early, and we follow them every 6 months. Okay, and you'd ask them, draw a clock, put in all the numbers, and set the time at 10 after 11. Sounds easy, but you know that 10 after is not a 10, it's a 2. You have to abstract. It's very complex. What do? They get stuck to the very salient information, 10, 11, 10, 11, right? And they do it wrong. You can give them an IQ test. They do very well because you know it or you don't. You give them this small task, they can't do that. Here it was able to do it. You know, they put the one here, and they were able to do it. A lot of work. Here, no way, 10, 11. Here, 10, 11. But there's another problem here. It's called perceptual neglect. When you have damage to the association area of the right temporal parietal region, you tend not to pay attention to the opposite side, the left side. So you can see how this works, okay? So now how this frontal functions or other dementias could affect working in the environment. Okay, they're coming to my office, okay? A patient with frontal dysfunctions, they're coming to office, and all those dementias have, you know, frontal dysfunctions because frontal lobes is a big portion. What they do, I sit over here and I watch those patients coming in. You know what they do? If you want to go up to my unit, okay, you have to press here to go up, press here to go down. You know what they do? They press the obvious thing, which is the big arrow, and it doesn't work. The doors open, what do they see? A sign that says do not enter. Actually says do not smoke. But red sign, whoop, don't come in. And they start looking confused. Okay, then they get into the elevator. Somebody nice brings them in there. I want to see who, the name, Dr. Prue, yeah, 4th floor. Well, the doors open on the 2nd floor. And look what you get, okay? When the doors open, okay, typical hospital, eh? Look at that, 2F that away. 2E that away, education on the floor, though. 2X, where's that? What's this? What's the logic? Well, it took me a long time, but there was another Frenchman at Baker's who was in charge of physical plant. It took me 2 years to figure out what he meant by 2H, and it was like, administration. And this poor fellow, is died, so touch wood, okay? He's dead now. Come in, yeah? Okay, now let's... and this is my office. Look at that. Exit. That away, exit. I want to get in somewhere, right? You have cognitive disorder. You can't get in no hospital. So the problem, the patient the problem that I saw, that took 2 hours, that was within normal range. Not remembering his wife was the problem, okay? No, you think this is funny? It's not all that funny, my friends, okay? How do you flush the damn thing, huh? This is where I work. We specialize in cognitive disorders. Astronauts can't do this. You gotta flush it in the back, and what are those gizmos, And then, when I got there in '86, okay, so we're behavioral neurologists, neuropsychiatrists, specialists galore. Huh? It said here, pull chain for help. And then they put masking tape over here, and they put a little yellow sign with an exclamation mark and a star which says, do not pull a chain to flush a toilet. So, hey, my friends, I tell you, the line here, what's the poor, here's another example of a confused patient, right? We put the same, was it the patient who was confused, or was the environment confusing? Or was the environment disabling? Oh, yes. Not only that, my friends, I think that confusing, disabling environment, stressful environment could actually, if you followed my logic, could actually exacerbate the disease process, make it worse, and, okay, really. So you can reduce a lot of disability by really looking at the environment and reducing, make them a lot more functional. Okay, last few slides is to talk to you about some exciting new developments in the field, okay? So early intervention is really where it's going and very hot. MCIs, mild cognitive impairment, remember that? Reducing impairments with new drugs, stem cells, brain plasticity, all new areas of research, clinical research. So MCIs, okay, what this is very interesting. This is clinical research. We're not doing this clinically. We're doing research on it, and very interesting. What we see here, medical doctors, family doctors always send people, because medicine is pathology, okay? When you're dysfunctional, you're sent to, you go to see a doctor when things are not working. And they go see the doctor and say, well, my memory is not what it was. They have subjective memory complaints. But the doctors ask questions about how they were working at home. They're doing very well in their daily activities. Remember dementia, we said people become dependent in their activities of daily living. They're not dependent. They're doing fine. So the medical family doctor says, come and see me in 6 months. They come and see you in 6 months. They're still doing okay, okay? Now, when they start becoming dysfunctional, they send them to specialists, behavioral neurologists, neuropsychologists, and that's when we see them. What we're doing now, we go to the family doctor's office and we say, when you see somebody, when you see some of your patients who have subjective memory complaints, could we see them? We see them, we give a memory test, and we take those who have significant problems on memory. They have a problem on memory. We bring them in, okay? And when we follow these people over 5 years, over 50% of these people convert into full-blown dementia. Some don't. Why don't they? We have to study all of that, okay? So now when you follow people who progress into dementia, have early signs, we find new exciting things. We find that This area here of the brain, the entorhinal cortex, is the first one to be damaged. The second one is the hippocampus. Episodic memory is very important over here, laying down new memories. And this frontal systems here are the third one to go down. Okay, so now, if we make the connections with everything else, go down lower into the brain. I told you a little bit before about the basal forebrain nuclei in Alzheimer's disease. And then that, these little nuclei could be subdivided into three. The first one to deteriorate is this one. So this one projects these neurotransmitters, the cholinergic neurotransmitters project into where? The hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex. This one is the second one into the frontal systems. So what you're seeing is that how the complex behavior, as they get worse, as they deteriorate, match with the brain regions, anatomy, and also the neurotransmitters. And those neurotransmitters, called the cholinergic system, by the way, all the drugs that we now give for people who have Alzheimer's are cholinergic enhancing drugs. And we're now trying to tweak all of this because, those cholinergic enhancing drugs, those cholinergic systems actually activates different types of receptors, nicotinic, muscarinic, different types of receptors. And, so we want to tweak that in research and try to be a lot more sophisticated. And then maybe one day we'll get even closer to those cures. Strokes, okay, there's new protocols now. Strokes in the brain is a bit like a bruised apple. You can have this area of damage here, and after a little while, all the surrounding area, we call that penumbra effect in the brain, die out, okay? So now what they do when people has a stroke attack, not a stroke, you call it a stroke attack, they go to the hospital, give them a certain drug, okay? And what that drug does is that it kind of puts all the regional neurons around here to sleep a little bit, and then after that they withdraw this drug, and what you get is you contain the damage. So what that means in terms of the brain is that you can contain the damage from all the region here, and then you can reduce the degree of cognitive disorders dramatically because of those new medical procedures. We hear about stem cells. We now know that there are stem cells where? In the hippocampus. Will we be able to coax some of those cells one day? Well, there's a lot of research. We're not there. You'll be hearing a lot about that. You are, actually. And then you see patients. This man here had the stroke on the right side of his brain. Okay, and what we have him do is very, very specific problems related to his problem, to his disease, okay, to his brain damage, which is a perceptual problem. You have to have him do a perceptual task. You train him on this for about 2 or 3 weeks, and this man had it damaged about 2 years ago, so-called recovered. And what we see in the brain is that we can now look at the brain. What happens is that the part of the brain, the left side, which is not damaged, is compensating. So we can see now that if we do appropriate training of behaviors, very well targeted, those behaviors entrain or activate nerve growth factors in the brain, and by combining drugs with very specific behaviors, we can get a lot more effective results, and then the brain could compensate. In this case, the opposite side of the brain showed more activity. So to recap, okay, I've talked about the brain, okay, I've talked about behavior, environment. We're getting to actually tackle the brain disorder itself. I talked about compensation. I don't want to minimize that, okay? Because I have a medical problem, right? I can't see, okay? And because I have this medical problem, it's progressive. The ophthalmologist says, Guy, it's getting worse and worse. And believe me, it's bad. I pay $300 extra to look good, okay? It's bad. And because of this biological permanent problem, and it tends to get worse, I have a terrible disability. I can't drive my car. I'm totally dysfunctional. Now, they can't do nothing right now, but this thing here has been around for 300 years, and I'm telling you, bye-bye disability. I'm functional all of a sudden, right? So when I talked about the dementias at this level, you can get dramatic improvements, okay, at the behavioral and environmental levels, okay? So my last slide. The brain, for us to have a mind, the mind to exist, the mind has to be, the brain has to be plugged into a context, okay? And I've talked a lot about abnormal aging, dementia, medical schools. That's what that's all about. And but aging is not disease. Aging is a privilege. Some of us, this man has Alzheimer's disease, is not so lucky. But I want to point out that this little girl he has in his arms, okay, is amnestic. All of you, until the age of 3 or 4, were totally amnestic, okay? And what's happening is that why are they amnestic? Because this generation, our generation, passes new knowledge and new habits and new culture to this so they can rewire their programs and their brain functions. Why? To be able to take that wisdom and maybe help and eradicate some of the disease and make our world a better world. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate it very much.